So UFC Fight Night London, Evloev versus Murphy occurred earlier today, and overall, I think it was a pretty good fight night card. I think that the main event definitely delivered. I think we had a lot of good fights throughout the card. We had a couple upsets, a couple of exciting fights here and there, but overall, I think the biggest takeaway from this, which is one of the actual undercover takeaways, is this card was very good and indicative of the UFC's intention to continue building a lot of these divisions. Certain divisions that either were lacking on decline or just straight up shit were definitely on the slight highlights in how and the quality of talent that were being put forward. I think it also is indicative of the potential next matchup for Alexander Volkanovski, and we're going to have to get into why this is only the potential next matchup at the end of this card, end of this this reaction. Anyways, I'm gonna start with the early prelims and with the main event. You know what we do. Predictions were pretty on point though. I think I only missed three, so you already know you got to lock in with your boy. Let's get started though. And we will begin with the women's strawweight bout of Chanel Dyer versus Ravina Oliveira. For my pick, I had Chanel Dyer for this one, and she more or less did what I expected, even more dynamically than what I was expecting. She basically just outskilled and just beat down Ravina Oliveira throughout this fight. I expected it to be a little bit more competitive, but what happened was Oliveira attempted to kind of overwhelm her, throwing a lot of big swinging blows. It ended up not going her way. Chanel Dyer kind of just was a lot more efficient as well as cerebral with how she was fighting. She was able to avoid a lot of those shots. If you look at the total strikes, while it may say that Chanel Dyer was the one who landed more, but Oliveira attempted a lot more strikes. Dyer was just able to avoid a lot of them and counter appropriately. Overall, it was a very great performance, and it definitely was a joy to see. I think that Chanel Dyer has a lot of potential for the strawweight, especially women's strawweight. Always could use new talent on the uprising. Congratulations to her, and moving on. Now, the next matchup would be Shamrock versus Abdul Karim Al Sawadi, which is the first pick I got wrong of the night. Before I get into this breakdown, I'll say I don't know why there was so much bad blood, primarily on the part of Al Sawadi for this matchup. Shamrock seemed like he just kept trying to touch hands in between and he kept trying to be respectful and nice. But Sawadi really just seemed to hate the guy's guts. Even at the end when he swung at him just for no reason at all, basically. Like, I don't know what it was, but he really just disliked him. But to get into the fight, Shamrock, I think Shamrock could have won this one. No, that does not mean that I think Shamrock won this fight. I think it was very clear that Al Sawadi won. What I mean is, when you look at that first round and you saw how he was fighting, I think Shamrock was fully capable of taking advantage of moments, landing good hits, and if he had applied more pressure early on and capitalized a bit more on certain opportunities, I think he had all the tools needed to actually be the victor of this fight. However, what actually happened was he basically got drowned with Salwadi's pace. Salwadi just threw an overwhelmingly more amount of strikes and landed more consecutively as well. You look at the differential, Al Sawadi literally more than doubled Shamrock's striking output. When you look at this, I think the biggest issue was Shamrock ended up being very hesitant as the fight went on, whereas Sawadi was growing more and more confident from this matchup. You see Shamrock start off that first round. I know a lot of people gave it to Sawadi, but I personally actually gave it to Shamrock. But when you watch this clash between the two, Al Sawadi started off by kind of more or less feeding off Shamrock's energy a bit. He was still trying to push his pace, but he himself didn't really start drowning him until it got into the latter part of the second and onto the third. Shamrock was very hesitant, very limited in his offense, and I think that a lot of points he was just very risk averse. I think he was very unwilling to risk potential counters to himself while making his attempts to advance, and it resulted in him compromising and reducing his onslaught to the point that he ended up suffering for it heavily. And it was by the time he got to the end, while his corner was trying to encourage him to kind of put more effort in, it was too late and he was just way behind. Also, ended up overwhelming him, and we see how that ended up resulting. Moving on to the next fight, we had Brando Perikik versus Louis Sutherland. This fight more or less went how I expected it to. I've said before that Brando Perikik is one of the fighters, especially in heavyweight, that I have my eyes on. However, I think that he is very indicative of what I'd mentioned earlier, which is the UFC's attempt at rebuilding divisions, especially heavyweight. A lot of people keep focusing on the fact that a lot of these divisions aren't to the level that they once were. A lot of people seem to always criticize the heavyweight division for how shit it is, but nobody has really been taking notice. In my opinion, nobody's really taking notice of how heavily the UFC has been attempting to rebuild heavyweight. We have had a constant influx of new heavyweight prospects, contenders, and talent in recent time. Brando Perikik is an example. We also have people who they've been attempting to build. We have stars like Waldo Cortez Acosta that ended up developing recently. We have people like Walter Walker, who's on the up and coming. We have people like that have constantly been coming into the heavyweight, and we have a lot of these fresh faces up. The issue is a division takes time to build. It doesn't happen overnight. The division isn't shit this month and great next month. And I think it's very unrealistic. People keep hammering how bad it is and what's the UFC going to do without even acknowledging the fact that the UFC is attempting to do something right now. My opinion, by the end of the year, next year, the heavyweight division is going to look very different than how it looks right now. But in order for that to happen, we need to give it the time, chance, and opportunity to actually grow and develop. These top 15 fighters, these old wash fat men, take time before we can get some of the fresher, more active, more well-rounded new generation heavyweights to actually replace them and actually set up these matchups. And Brando Perikik's next fight is probably going to be for a ranking. If not his next fight, definitely the fight after that, assuming he keeps winning. He hasn't never made it to a third round. Not saying he's a new Tom Aspinall, because I do think that he has a bit more gaps than Aspinall does. But my point is that he, alongside others in the division, are intentional builds. Even people like a Josh Hokett. People are being brought in to quote unquote make heavyweight great again. Not to sound like the president, but these are intentional decisions that are very obviously being made by the UFC. To quickly get into the fight, Louis Sutherland came out aggressive. He wanted to end this quickly. He saw the threat of he saw the threat of Perikik. I personally believe that Brando Perikik is a little bit too lackadaisical with how he handles the heavyweight. He himself had said that he didn't know anything about Louis Sutherland. I do think that he's taking them too lightly. While yes, for us as the viewers saying they should and not paying attention, all that, that's cool for us who aren't in the octagon. But anybody can get knocked out, especially with MMA and especially in the heavyweight division. So I think that he definitely needs to be a little bit more aware and concerned. But he was defended very soundly against Sutherland's onslaught. Don't let the fact that he has much more total strikes fool you. Louis Sutherland went for broke. He threw and he tried his best. But Brando Perikik was very aware, very defensively sound, and when he countered, he made sure that it counted. When he landed, He made sure that he finished the job and got Louis Sutherland out of there. It was a very fast fight, but it was very, very interesting to see. It also gives you a lot of hope for the future from Brando Perkic. But once again, the potential of heavyweight is there. When I get into the next heavyweight matchup on this card, I'll go in even further, but it's definitely great to see. Moving on to the next fight, we have Mantis Condraveticius versus Antonio Tricoli. Now, what I want to say is, even though Mantis was my pick for the victor of this fight, I was disappointed by his performance. Yeah, he won, but he showed a lot of inexperience in that fight. When you watch the fight between Mantis and Tricoli, he could have finished Tricoli at least twice in each round. And I'm talking clearly finished. Even in the round one, he had Tricoli in a position that had the ref look at Tricoli and say, yo, you can't just stand there sit and get beat on. Otherwise, the fight was going to get stopped. All Mantis had to do was keep doing what he was doing, which is hitting him. Because Tricoli literally didn't start moving in that moment. But Mantis was very wild in some moments. He was very undisciplined, how he threw, how he strike. He would be in a position where he was winning with strikes and then start grappling. And in that same example, he was the one who ruined his own position. Of these two fighters, it was very clear that Tricoli was the one with the higher fight IQ. If anything, Mantis greatly benefited by the fact that Tricoli was slower and physically weaker than he is. If this was a much younger and a bit more technically skilled fighter, this would have been a very bad time for Mantis, in my opinion. Because he left himself so open. Even when he was throwing, he was too easy to counter. He wasn't able to properly complete certain aspects and moments. He really was just sabotaging himself. He is, especially in the division like middleweight, where as you get higher in level competitions, fighters are either a lot physically stronger, have a lot more knockout power, or just are a lot faster, or some combination of the three. Most fighters at a higher level in the current UFC's middleweight division have 2 out of 3 of these aspects. Tricoli wasn't fast, didn't have much physical strength, and he doesn't have much knockout power. So Mantis got benefited because he was getting hit himself a decent amount as well. A lot more shots connected than what should have. But as you get higher, you're going to be for a rude awakening if you don't make certain technical improvements in his style. I look forward to see how he develops, but I personally cannot even consider him a prospect at this point. Because for me, a prospect is someone who has the potential to become a champion in said division. I cannot consider Mantis a champion when I don't even know if he has the potential to make it to the top 10 in the rankings, much less actually realistically aim for a championship. Hopefully, those adjustments will be made as he gains more experience and goes against higher level of competition. But at this point in time, there definitely is a lot that he needs to work on. Moving on, we have Mario Pinto versus Felipe Franco. Now, this is the other heavyweight fight on this card, and this is one I really want to talk about as well. My pick was Felipe Franco. Second pick I ended up getting wrong on the card. I know that it was short notice, but I thought Franco coming up being more used to a more mobile group, I think his mobility would have been the big difference. I expected him to have better footwork, thought he would have been faster and more accurate. And I thought that him being smaller would have actually been an advantage for him because I thought that he would have been able to beat up the body more and then work his way and break down Pinto. Overall, I think it was a solid heavyweight fight, and I think neither of these two fighters lost any stock from this performance. I think that it definitely is a good experience for them both, but I just have to speak about Pinto for a bit. Pinto is the fighter who a lot of people have a lot of expectations for in heavyweight as well. He's amongst the prospects. Like I said, when you think about the upcoming prospects for the current UFC heavyweight, you have people like Waldo Cortez Acosta, who's made himself a star. But then, besides, you have Mario Pinto, one with Talison Teixeira. I know he had a terrible performance his last fight, but Talison Teixeira is still somebody who's considered a prospect by many. Then you have people like Brando Perikic, who fought earlier on the card, and you have people like a Josh Hokett coming up. And once again, as I even mentioned before, you have a Walter Walker. Like, you have a lot of heavyweight talent on the rise that the people have a lot of expectations for. And Pinto definitely made sure to prove why those expectations were placed in him. His performance, while I expect him to be the slower fighter, his striking was by far faster. He was more solid and he was very aware. And you saw even his grappling attempts where he has a very solid understanding. When you look at the striking differential, 137 versus 60, if you were to break it down round by round, you have him having 37 to 16 in round 1, 39 to 11 in round 2, and 61 to 33 in round 3. That means that despite being the naturally heavier person from a division that's considered to be far less mobile and agile, Pinto did not fall behind, and if anything, completely superseded the expectations with his output, not to mention the takedowns. My opinion, this new generation of heavyweight is a lot more well-rounded than how a lot of people have been historically, and Pinto put that on display. He was willing to get down, dirty, and gritty. He was aware. He was fundamentally sound, and he remained very calm in all moments of the fight. Overall, he definitely showcased his level, and he definitely showcased why he is an undefeated fighter at this point in time. I think Mario Pinto is one of the great prospects coming up for the UFC's heavyweight division. I believe that people should really give the credit that's deserved and earned. If by the end of next year, when you look at that top 15 in heavyweight, as long as everyone remains active, if all of these contenders, as up and coming contenders, can fight 2 to 3 times a year, by the end of next year, I'm expecting that top 15 to look very, very different than what it is right now. Felipe Franco as well, I see him having a solid future in heavyweight. He managed to keep up with Pinto. He was throwing, he connected with some bombs, but Pinto was just able to not just weather it, but he was able to actually swerve off a lot of the proper connecting points. He was avoiding a lot of danger. Very, very solid heavyweight fight. It's a very good determinant of what can be expected for the direction that the UFC is going in the future. Moving on, we have Nathaniel Wood versus Lucine Queda. Now, I have to be honest. Nathaniel Wood was my pick. He was who I expect to win the fight, but I felt as if Queda won the fight. When you look at the total strikes, it says that Nathaniel Wood connected more, but how I felt watching the fight, especially in the second round, I felt as if Queda was a lot faster. He connected a lot more, and it was a lot more competitive, and I would argue Queda should have been won. This is why it was a split decision. Of the split decision, I'm probably on the side, watching the fight, I was probably on the side of Queda. I do need to rewatch the fight because I have a personal policy that if you feel as if somebody different from that the judges selected won, and it's not overwhelming, crazy, like, oh, he clearly won, and they give it to him, not just a blatant robbery, then you should rewatch the fight and just see if you are certain that you still feel the same way you felt initially. When I break it down round by round one, they said Wood landed more, but it felt as if Queda connected a little bit more in round 1. Whereas with round 2, Queda's speed was on full display. He was landing more. They both were extremely fast fighters, by the way. Very much a back and forth. But Cadiz felt like his speed was a lot more. I say this all the time. If every strike was a significant strike, then that's not true. It means they weren't paying attention. It's impossible for every single strike in a fight to be considered a significant strike. A jab used to just judge distance that connects a little bit is not a significant strike. It's a strike, it's a total strike, it's not a significant strike. There is a difference. So if they ever say that for any round, general, and as they said for the whole fight that 67 total strikes were 67 significant strikes and vice versa, then that just means they weren't paying attention. When you get to the third round, overwhelmingly, Nathaniel Wood was connecting more. They both were avoiding a lot of damage. According to the judges, they gave Wood 2 of 3 rounds. For me, I would give 2 of 3 rounds to Cato. Very much a great fight. Very much a fight that I got to rewatch. But congratulations to Nathaniel Wood. He was able to wither out a storm. He was very durable. I think Cato did more damage to him. You saw he was bleeding more, did more damage to his nose. But once again, congratulations to them both on a good performance. Moving on, we have Mason Jones versus Axel Sola. I said it when I was doing my prediction. I just felt that this was a Jones fight. This is the second time I've said this, and every time I said it, that fighter won. So anytime y'all hear me saying, I got a feeling, lock in. Because that means, yeah, something's speaking to him. And this fight is probably going to end up with the dub. This fight was a very bloody fight, which made it a very fun fight. Initially, Axel Sola was just a lot more technical, because he is the more technical fighter. It was a lot more sound. He was able to just basically get an advantage on Jones in the early parts. But as I've said before, Mason Jones will make it chaotic if he needs to. He'll make it gritty. He'll make it grunge. He'll do what he needs for the win. As opposed to just being a technical expert on display, he will do whatever it takes to actually get the win. Due to that, he ended up putting out a very impressive performance because despite the danger, he withered the storm and he actually risked his chin to actually land some. The critique that I had earlier against Shamrock, Mason Jones did the exact opposite. Whereas I said Shamrock was a little bit hesitant for risk of damage, Mason Jones said F the damage and risked it all in order to land damage. And it ended up benefiting him in the end, where he was able to pull off a unanimous decision and deliver an excellent performance. Overall, he was a very fun fight, and I love to see him back in the win column once again in putting on very entertaining performances. Moving on to the next fight, and congratulations to them both. So now we have the main card, and we open with a Curtis Campbell versus Danny Silva. Curtis Campbell was both my pick, so this is the last fight I got wrong on the card. Curtis Campbell was my pick as well as the favorite, and with good reason. I think that was very much on display in the beginning. He had very solid fundamental striking. His kicks were beautiful and on immediate display, and his grappling was high level. When you saw it, he was absolutely advancing positions smoothly, especially when you see that initial first round. He was definitely in head. Danny Silva, on the other hand, was a lot more aggressive, a lot more intentional, and I think that was the name of this fight. Danny Silva never just stopped. He never allowed for Curtis Campbell to just be comfortable. He kept moving. When he got into a bad grappling position, he scrambled like his life depended on it. When he was in a situation where he wasn't able to properly adjust, he ensured that he didn't stop moving. If he was worried about him losing a striking battle, he didn't just stay there. I heard the announcer say that they were about equal in striking or equal against each other on the feet. No, that wasn't the case. Curtis Campbell was overwhelmingly better in the grappling positions, but Curtis Campbell also had better kicks. Danny Silva, however, had the much better hands. He had the more technical and foundational boxing. He had the faster combination speed. He was landing a lot more with the striking, and that was what he did. He realized he had an opportunity when he dazed Campbell temporarily, and he immediately pounced on it and finished it when it counted. I think that that is exactly the type of thing that I was speaking about earlier when I was giving critiques against that fight against Tricoli. There were times where Tricoli was just in a terrible position, and all you had to do was keep delivering strikes and ground upon, and those were not taken advantage of. Whereas with Danny Silva, you got that one moment, you go for the finish, you don't know when you're going to get it again, you don't know how this fight could shift. You get a chance to win, you make sure you win, and that is exactly what you love to see. I know that the controversial post fight, Danny Silva was like still broke. I get it. Like that is heartbreaking to hear, especially for people who are literally risking their health for our entertainment. That definitely is not what you want to hear from a fighter. So hopefully the bonus will help out a lot with that, and put if he could potentially get a little bit of help and support outside of that. But as far as the fight, excellent performance. This definitely put him in a better position to continue earning more money. And I'm looking forward to Curtis Campbell's next outing as well. I think he had a great fight while it lasted. I think he just got caught by something, and he has something specific to work on now. I'm definitely looking forward to see how he makes those adjustments in his next outing. After all, some of the greats have lost one unexpectedly. Shit, Islam is considered the best fighter in the world right now, and he got flash knocked out. So, mistakes happen. It's how you could bounce back. Look forward to both of these fighters' next match and their next outing. And let's move on to the next fight. Now, we had Roman Dolidze. We had a Roman Dolidze versus Christian Leroy Duncan. This fight more or less went how I expected, but I was a bit disappointed, to be honest. I thought Leroy Duncan was about to just clean him up, get him out of there early. Don't get me wrong, he definitely cleaned him up, but I think some of the critiques I gave came out. I was speaking about it earlier with the previous middleweight bout of people in middleweight are one of those divisions that people are either physically strong, fast, or have knockout power. When you look at Roman Dolidze, he is physically strong and he has decent pop on his shots. Christian Leroy Duncan was fast and he's known for his knockout power. I think Leroy Duncan was a bit hesitant to like fully commit to some of his attacking and striking because of Dolidze's counters and his durability. While Dolidze was more or less beat down for this whole fight, he was very durable and he stayed in it and he was able to withstand a lot of attacks that would have took out lesser fighters. Leroy Duncan had excellent mobility. His footwork was on display, but he was noticeably a bit gun shy when it came to certain positions and moments. We saw that sometimes when Dolidze was able to like force the grappling. Dolidze, this is the most amount of takedowns he's landed in like I think the past couple of years. So for an opponent like Leroy Duncan, who definitely he relies on his striking a lot and he relies on his speed a lot, I definitely would say that he probably has to be a bit more aware, especially as you go up against fighters that are much faster than a Roman Dolidze and a lot more aggressive in their approach. Overall, I'd say that this was a okay fight. I think it was solid. It just wasn't very competitive. It was very one-sided, and it definitely had a lot of slow moments throughout it. But it definitely was a good quality name for Christian Leroy Duncan, and we'll see how that continues to progress further. As for Roman Dolidze, I don't know if he can necessarily work on his speed at this stage, but I definitely think that he needs to work on his entries. His grappling entries he needs more improvement in how he gets a takedown. He also needs more improvement with how fast he can get the finish, and he needs to improve more better in his intentional aggressive striking. He's more of a counter striker when it comes to opponents faster than him, and he tends to get kind of overwhelmed if he can't knock out someone. And we saw with the Anthony Hernandez fight, he gets drowned by pace if a fighter does too much. It's the same shit we saw his previous loss. So I look forward to see if there can be any improvements made. Like one of his friends is Merab Davishvili, so he definitely could get some pointers on weaponizing pace a little bit better, or at least getting more accustomed to facing weaponized pace a bit better. But overall, still okay enough fight. Moving on, we have a Iwo Baranskui versus Austin Lane. This fight was over before you knew. You know when they said, don't blink? This was the perfect example of don't blink. I told you, I already expected Iwo to win this one, but good God. This was on the same level as Benoit Saint Denis' knockout of Benil Dariush. Iwo walked in. If you ended up feeling itchy, if you had to scratch your foot and you looked away for a second, or you were even thinking about using the bathroom, it was already over. You literally, when this fight was over so fast that when they played the replays was the entire fight from start to finish. This fight was over so fast that the ref needed a second to realize that it was over. Iwo couldn't believe that he already knocked him out. He was like, God damn, I didn't even finish connecting properly. This fight was, if y'all ever know Ha Ha Davis, this fight was a breeze. Iwo got him out of there with no issues. I can't even use this to evaluate him. You can just be like, wow, this was fun. But light heavyweight is one of those divisions that has very clearly been being rebuilt for some time now. If you take a look at even some of the prospects, the people that we're using, I believe his name escapes me at this moment right now, but the fighter that fought, the light heavyweight fighter that fought in the last card, I believe top 5, was it? I don't remember if it's Mirzakhanov. If I'm remembering correctly, I think it might be Mirzakhanov, who he's been lighting up a storm. You have Iwo now. You see a lot of these prospects coming in, and the UFC has definitely been trying to make these divisions as a whole a lot more exciting for a while. Just think that little acknowledgement of that is it would be crucial because it gives you something to look forward to. Either way, very exciting performance. Now moving on to the next one. So in this fight, we had Michael Venom Page versus Sam Patterson. I'm not going to lie to you, it was a bit of a lackluster fight. Michael Venom Page can be very exciting or very boring depending on his opponent. Because if he's against an opponent who's very aggressive, then he tends to be a very exciting fight. Because he's an excellent counterpuncher. He tends to counter with a 1-2, or even when he initiates with a 1-2. The issue is that he tends to look more boring against better quality fighters, because smarter fighters approach him a lot more intelligently. They're a lot more risk averse, a lot less willing to intentionally place themselves in potentially terrible situations. An example of that would be Ian Gary. When he fought Ian Gary took the grappling approach. Ian Gary was a lot more defensive. He focused more on timing. Same shit with Sam Patterson. When he was being aggressive towards Sam Patterson in the initial round, Sam Patterson didn't take the obvious baits. He waited a lot more. You ended up having the crowd boo a lot because it felt like a lot of just waiting and staring. Kind of felt like Israel Adesanya versus Rolly Romero a little bit. But that's just the thing. MVP is too fast, he's too slick, he's a lot difficult to hit, a lot for most people, and a lot of people just aren't willing to risk that if they are on the higher level of fight IQ. So they just approach it a lot more intelligently. It doesn't end up making for good TV. However, it still was a okay enough fight to display skill wise. I don't think that this loss necessarily takes anything from either of these two fighters. This fight takes anything from them necessarily, but MVP as a fighter who doesn't appear to care about the championships at all, you kind of have to put Michael Venom Page with fighters that, to be honest, just aren't known for being crazy, like fight IQ or crazy intellectual fight style fighters. That's why like uh him versus what the gentleman's name? Him versus Kevin Holland was so entertaining because it was basically a guy who just gonna stand there, strike, like try to talk shit. He ended up getting completely outclassed. Then even him versus Shara Bullet, Shara got outclassed completely because a lot of that striking doesn't work with him as well. MVP's too fast, too smart, and he likes to play too much. At the end, as I said, it was a fairly lackluster fight. Wasn't the best TV. However, very clearly went to MVP. Moving on, we got the co-main event of Luke Riley versus Michael Aswell Jr. I think this was a very entertaining fight. To juxtapose the fight that just came before it, I think this was a very entertaining fight. Someone reached out and had asked me what were my thoughts on the performance by Luke Riley, and I came up with three thoughts. My first thought, Luke Riley has a fucking chin on him. Michael Aswell Jr. was landing some bombs on him. This was a very fast paced fight. They both came out, they both were throwing a lot, and Aswell Jr. was landing a lot, and a lot. And a lot of the ones he landed, Luke Riley basically was non reactive to it. Luke Riley would get hits with some shit that would spin him, and he would just put his face back. That you get spun, and he just put his head right back on the turn. He just kept his head center line the moment it got spun, with no reaction, no stumbling. He was always present. It was very, very impressive to see because that ended up playing into the fight as it progressed. How you saw Michael Aswell have that moment where he's wondering, damn, what do I have to do to hurt this guy? My second takeaway is that Luke Riley's a slow starter. Luke Riley, when you watch his fights, he is someone who needs to build into fights a bit. While he is there and while he can perform very well, initially it feels like he needs a little bit of time to adjust to the pace of his opponent. He needs to adjust to the pace of his opponent. He needs to be able to put together his combinations comfortably. He needs to feel it out in there. He needs to kind of get to the point where now he feels comfortable fully implementing his game plan. So you can definitely see that he's one of those fighters that he builds more and more and more until he kind of gets to that point where he can overwhelm them. Gene Silva is a little bit similar when it comes to higher level opponents, whereas I feel like Luke Riley is just like that in general. He just needs a little moment to warm up. Then, my last takeaway is that Luke Riley is not yet at the higher levels of featherweight. If I had to give an assumption, I'd say Luke Riley is probably skill-wise right now, he's probably somewhere around the 10 to 15 range of featherweight. My opinion, I think that he's actually kind of a bit similar to the Paddy Pimblett in his earlier UFC career. I know. He's from the UK and the hairstyle and all that. But when you look at Luke Riley, when you look at Paddy's earlier career, some of the fights that people expected Paddy to like blow them out of the water, that didn't happen. Some of the performance where you expect a little bit more from Paddy, that just wasn't really how it was going. Like Paddy would struggle against people that you think he should overwhelm, or his performance wasn't as dynamic as people wanted from him. And sometimes people would even say that I think it was against Jared Gordon, if I remember correctly, that people were like he should have lost and stuff. So like they have their moments, but with Luke Riley, he kind of reminds me of that feeling. However, great fight. When you look at the striking differential, you see 113 to 107 to show just how much they were both throwing. But when you look at the significant striking differential, that's where you see the overwhelming difference. In round one, you see the total strike difference. As I said before, In the first round, I give it to Michael Aswell Jr., to be honest, because I think that Riley was building a lot more then. I think Aswell came out and was putting it on him and was really trying to make a statement and really trying to get him out of there. But when you look at the significant strikes, you see a little bit difference more for Riley. However, I think that's him just being the smarter fighter. But then when you look at the next round, to compare round one and round two, you see a lot more total strikes. You see that their output becomes more similar, and you see that the significant strikes still in favor of Riley, but it's closer than what it was previously. But then once you get to the third round now, where Riley's chin has been on full display, how he's been imposing his will, how he's been adjusting, making those differences, making those reads, and having, while Michael Aswell Jr. is getting more tired and his pace is slowing, Riley's pace is increasing and he's building more. Now, when we actually go to the third round, see the most difference. You see that Riley now has much more total strikes and much more significant strikes. You see, because you saw that in the fight. You saw it looked like Michael Aswell Jr. was kind of getting smothered. You saw him have the takedown, didn't last long. You saw Riley get right back up, and you saw him really put it on him. Overall, it was a very entertaining performance, and it definitely gives you hopes for the future of Luke Riley. Moving on, we have the main event of Movsar Evloev versus Lerone Murphy. This is a fight I was very excited for because I have high expectations of both these fighters. My opinion, both of these fighters are amongst the top 5 in the division right now. I think that if you were supposed to consider without the champion involved and just purely the fighters in the division, I'd say both of these fighters are probably top 3 in the division right now when it comes to skill wise. In this fight, Movsar was my pick, and I think Movsar came out with the intention to showcase that he's not just this grappling wrestling guy with no other skill set that people keep trying to paint him as. I feel like people are just used to how he looks, where he's from, and are just pigeonholed to the thought process that all he does is wrestle, but that's not true. Movsar has always had very solid striking. He's always been very well-rounded and very multi-skilled. But his strongest attribute has always been his wrestling and his grappling skills. Same thing with Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy is a very, very skilled fighter, but he is comprehensively skilled. He's not just a striker. He has very solid grappling in defense and very solid grappling awareness, which is why Movsar couldn't keep him down for any serious periods of time. When you look at the output of total strikes, Movsar overwhelmingly landed more total strikes than him, but Murphy had more significant strikes. First of all, I said this all the time. If they said if all the total strikes were significant strikes, then it weren't all significant strikes. It means somebody wasn't paying attention. However, if we take it at face value, Murphy had the better striking fundamentals. I think in the first round when it came out and you looked at it, I had a different scorecard than most people did. My opinion, I think this fight should have been a draw or should have gone to Lerone Murphy initially. It's another fight that I have to rewatch myself. But when I look at it initially, how I did it was I gave the first round to Movsar. I know a lot of people didn't. They gave it to Murphy. But in my opinion, if you watch the fight, I saw that Movsar avoided most of Murphy's shots, and I think he actually landed more. I think that these are actually wrong. I think Movsar landed more total strikes and more significant strikes because I think that he hit Murphy more and he got hit less. But round 1, I gave it to Movsar. Round 4, I think everyone gave to Movsar, and I gave round 5 to Movsar. But in round 4, Movsar lost a point because of the consecutive fouls, which would have ended this being as two rounds apiece, with that last round being 9-9. In that case, I would have given it a draw. First round, I think Movsar came out. I think his striking was more effective. I think Murphy was expecting the takedowns a lot more, and they didn't come. So because of that, I think Murphy was more hesitant in pushing a pace. I think Movsar was able to get that advantage in there. In the second round now, I think Movsar continued doing more of what he did in round one, and this time Murphy got more comfortable. I heard a lot of people questioning the strategy. Initially, I thought, based off my understanding, I think Movsar's strategy was to lure Murphy into a sense of false security. I think Mavzar was intending to lure Murphy into a false sense of security by having him become too comfortable with the striking and then mix in the grappling. But he didn't do that for the second round. As a result, Murphy was able to pull ahead. But that third round, that's when you saw Mavzar start initiating some of the grappling a little bit with a single takedown. That's when he started still combining it with his striking. I still gave Murphy the third round. I think the grappling was ineffective. I didn't think Movsar was able to get off an effective ground and pound, and I think Murphy was able to seal the deal with all the work he did throughout the round and how fast he got up. Despite that, I see a lot of people giving the third round to Movsar. So if I was supposed to use my own rating, and if I rewatch the fight at me, I see that you'd give Movsar the first, fourth, and fifth round and the third. Then I'd be like, okay, I see why a judge would give it to Movsar. But me personally, I don't. The fourth round, I think, is the most interesting round of the fight. I think Movsar was too lackadaisical throughout this fight. I think he was too comfortable. I think Movsar feels like he's the most cheated in the division, which I agree with. And I think most people who are fair would agree with as well. I think he expected that, already believes he's the best fighter outside of potentially Volkanovski. But I think that he genuinely believes he's the best fighter in the division. I believe he genuinely believes that he could beat anyone. So I think he was just way too comfortable in this fight until you got to this point in the fourth round, when he's doing more of what he's been doing, of just casually striking without much intensity. And when they fouled him second time and they took that point from him, you saw a completely different amount of intensity from him. He went at Murphy like his life depended on it. He increased his pace. He had more takedowns than he's had up to that point, and he started overwhelming him with the striking. Strikes were landing more, had more significant strikes landing. He was a lot more intense. He was a lot more aggressive, and he absolutely won that round because now he actually started fighting like he believed he could lose. And when that fifth round came about, he continued the intensity, and that's where you saw some of the biggest differences. I see some people giving Murphy the fifth round, but this is the one where the numbers are most against him, where when you look at the total strikes, Movsar was landing significantly more total strikes. When you look at the takedowns, while Murphy was still getting up rapidly, Movsar landed more takedowns in the fifth round than he landed for the entire rest of the fight combined. Movsar really turned up the intensity. While I'm not a fan of these fighters intentionally removing their biggest advantage or their biggest skill set from a fight just for a quote-unquote entertainment or just to prove a point. You've seen Bilal Muhammad suffer from it. You've seen Kevin Holland suffer from it. You've seen a lot of these fighters who want to quote-unquote prove how good they are at doing shit other than the shit that they get criticized for overusing or spamming, do it and end up fucked, end up sabotaging themselves. It's not worth it. However, this quality of performance from Movsar in the fifth, and the intensity and the pace he was able to put on Murphy, and then it's not to mention Movsar was landing more damage. Movsar made Murphy physically more damage and bloody than Murphy did to him. For somebody who was quote unquote considered just a grappler, Movsar landed overall more effective striking damage against Murphy than vice versa throughout this entire fight. I think this is very entertaining for me, at least. I do believe if this fight ended in a draw, then the person who would have ended up fighting Alexander Volkanovski next would have definitely been Gene Silva. I think Gene Silva is also in that top five best quality fighters, and I think that he's the next up as far as combination of entertainment and desire by the UFC. I think he's actually who the UFC wanted to fight Volk in the first place, but Diego Lopez was able to pull it out, and they put him there instead. I think, in my opinion, I think all three of the fighters I just named are capable of defeating Volkanovski on their best day. I think the best version of Movsar Evloev right now is capable of defeating Alexander Volkanovski. I think the same thing with Lerone Murphy. I think the same thing with Gene Silva. If anything, the fighter that I would be most hesitant to say that about would be Lerone Murphy, because I believe that Alexander Volkanovski does everything Lerone Murphy does, just better. The only thing is that right now he's a little bit older, he's a little bit slower, he's a little bit less durable than he once was. So because of that is why I say that. But as it is right now, I think the best version of all three of these fighters present real danger and challenge to Alexander Volkanovski. Dana White, despite everything, seems to still be leaning towards the Gene Silva angle a bit, so they might end up robbing Movsar again. I think his call out at the end was perfect. He didn't really seem too enthused by the UFC. They told him there's no excuse not giving the opportunity because Alexander Volkanovski has been asking for Movsar. I think Movsar, they should stop playing and just give Movsar his opportunity as well. I think when it comes to cases like this, the reason why they don't give opportunities is because everyone generally believes there is a possibility of Movsar winning. Otherwise, you would have already given him the chance to let Volkanovski take him out, and then you give the next people who you want. I think right now, as it stands, it's between Movsar Evloev and Gene Silva, and whoever goes next, I think that their best version could be Volkanovski. And if they don't, because Volkanovski is that good and he is a legend, if Volkanovski wins, I think he should retire on top for his next fight. Either way, that's how I see that going. Overall, I think it was a pretty great card. I think a lot of good talent was on display. I think a lot of good expectations for the future of what the UFC could be were also explained. I think we have a lot to look forward to, and this definitely proved a lot. Y'all let me know what y'all think, though. Y'all give me your thoughts. Hope y'all had a great week. Hope y'all have an even better weekend. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe. Y'all drop a comment. Let me know y'all thoughts. Hope y'all have a blessed day. Till next time. Peace.